has been 10 years since China's Belt and Road Initiative was formed, which is a global infrastructure development strategy that was adopted by the Chinese government to develop trade routes connecting China with the rest of the world. At the third Belt and Road Initiative Forum this week, President Xi Jinping unveiled new plans for the project, including his vision for future infrastructure, as well as emerging technology like digital space.
Meanwhile, the Taliban government is seeking to join the Belt and Road Initiative as China has shown interest in strengthening ties with the militant movement. Economics professor at Willamette University Yan Liang joins us now to weigh in on the anniversary of the Belt and Road Initiative, as well as current United States-China relations. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So to kick things off, obviously when you look at the world right now, there's sort of this competition that the United States has with China. It's a competition of influence, of power around the world. Where do things currently stand right now, and what does it mean that the Taliban might be looking at joining this with China?
Right. So first of all, I think between the U.S. and China, since the former President Trump, the two countries were in some sort of a trade war, and President Biden inherited and doubled down on the sort of competition with China. So the most recent irritation of the war, so to speak, it lies in the high-tech side. So if you remember, President Biden has initiated a ban on the high-tech, chips to China, and also some manufacturing equipment of chips to China since last year. And just very recently, on October 7th, the Bureau of Industry and Security issued a new regulations on the ban of high-tech chips and also manufacturing equipment of those chips to China. So it's sort of, again, trying to close the loopholes as they caught it, and trying to really reinforce the rules of banning sort of the high-tech chips to China, because the concern, again, is China may use these chips to manufacture, artificial intelligence equipment, and also apply, these AI products into its military equipment. So at this point, I think, what the Biden administration has been talking about is we're not interested in decoupling from China. We're too much entangled with the Chinese economy, and decoupling is not realistic. But we're trying to de-risk, meaning that we're going to set these small yard, but with very high fence, to protect the U.S.'s, interest in high tech, and also that military security interests. Now, when it comes to Taliban's joining of the BRI, I think it's clear that Afghanistan occupies a very important strategic, locations in that Belt Road sort of routes, and also the BRI really boasts on this open, clean, and green kinds of cooperation. So open means it's very inclusive. Anyone who wants to join will be able to have a seat. Clean means it has to be transparent and anti all kinds of corruption practices. And finally, green. So this is the most recent focus, is to promote green development.
So a lot of talk is happening now about this thing called the China miracle, and that the China miracle is ending. A lot of folks in the United States have been concerned about this thing that they call globalism, which I think is something different than what a lot of academics mean when they say globalism. There's a fear that the United States is outsourcing a lot of their manufacturing to either multinational corporations abroad or other countries. There's a lot of fear about China's rising economic power, and so much reporting about the China miracle ending. Can you just say a little bit about what the China miracle is, and in your view, if it's ending or continuing?
Yeah, great question. I think these are two related questions, but they're also independent questions. So for China's miracle, what that means is in the past 40 years, China has really achieved a net-breaking growth. So average annualized growth rate, was close to double digits. So, but the so-called end of China's miracle, again, it's really now plagued with all the media outlets and many of the think tank reports. So what they're arguing is because China has the structural flaws in its economy, it relies too much on debt, too much on investment. So now we're coming to the time where debt is it's so high that it's going to crush the economy. And plus, Xi Jinping's leadership has really turned the other way around. Made China's economy less dynamic. The private sector is much more restricted, and so on and so forth. So that's the idea of China is coming to the miracle is coming to an end. China is going to enter the slow growth, or even sort of secular stagnation. the growth rate is going to be around 2 to 3% from this point on. Now, and then when it comes to sort of the globalism, or what the Biden administration and the Europeans are talking about, is the idea of de-risking. So this idea that we're relying too much on China in terms of the supply chain, especially in some of the critical minerals and also in some of the manufacturing products. This is sort of a revelation, after the pandemic, that all these Western economies are relying so much on industrial supplies from China. And now with the tech war, again, the revelation is, when China banned, for example, gallium and the most recent one, the graphite exports, then these countries will put themselves at a vulnerable position. So the idea is that we need to de-risk. We need to shift the supply chain away from China, or at least diversify the supply chain to more allied countries. So I think this is the most recent sort of strategies under the Biden administration.
As that's all been going on, China, as we've been talking about, is celebrating, another anniversary of the Belt and Road Initiative and what that's been doing. Can you talk a little bit about what that might look like in Afghanistan? Obviously, as you said, this is an important sort of location in their long-term plan as far as where they want to have a foothold in different places in the world. But what would this look like to them, and what sort of restrictions or requirements might they have for the Taliban government? And is it wise for them to even trust the Taliban to be able to keep up its end of any bargain they strike?
Right. Well, this is a great question. I think China has the experience, I would say, and also some sort of tactics and strategies to work with governments that are not necessarily very reliable or transparent or democratic, right? China itself is not democratic. So I think it has the ways to engage these governments. Now, in terms of what needs to be done, I think, one thing that is clear from the BRI is China is very good in financing and constructing infrastructures, so roads, highways, ports, and many other hard infrastructure, and to promote the connectivity between countries. So as we all know, Afghanistan right now is really under really a shovel, in terms of the infrastructure. So I think China can definitely play a role in rebuilding some of the necessary infrastructure, even just like paved roads. I think that would go a long way to help to boost economic activities. But the next stage of China's BRI, as Xi Jinping delivered this 8-point speech at the Belt Road Forum. And the emphasis is going to be on green development and also tech development. So I think that probably will reflect in some of these so-called smart, beautiful, small and smart kind of projects in various regions. I would assume, including Afghanistan, which is, they're going to build projects that are relatively less in scale, but they're going to try to boost, for example, renewable energies production, or some of the people-centered kinds of infrastructures. It could be as simple as water or other sort of utilities that are much needed by the local people.
A lot of this conversation is surrounded by this thing we call debt, government debt, public debt. A lot of people are fearful that the United States, as Obama would say in his stump speech, has taken out a credit card with the Bank of China, and our children are going to have to pay it off. Right now, our government's funded thanks to a stopgap bill. Otherwise, we'd be facing a shutdown. Lots of talk about us balancing our budget. Our debt is a problem. A lot of talk about China's debt being a problem for them. Can you just say a little bit about why we perhaps should not be so concerned about foreign debt held by China?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I think it's very interesting that, the commentators would put at China and the United States, both countries are considered as taking too much debt, excessive debt, that's going to produce really pernicious consequences over time. But I think, these two countries are different, and they have definitely also similarities, I would say. I think it's a big mistake to lump private debt and government debt together, because both countries' governments are sovereign governments. They issue their own currencies, they spend in their own currencies, and they incur debt mostly in their own currencies. So there's no concern about the government is going to go bankrupt or not being able to, redeem the debt or repay the debt, or even if the government needs to repay the debt, in the final analysis. So I think for the United States, it's really not a question about can we afford taking on more debt to finance some necessary spending. We have passed 3 important acts in the past 3 years. 2021 we have the Infrastructure Act. 2022 we have the Inflation Reduction Act, and then we also have the Chips and Science Act. These arguably are expensive acts, but they're going to go a long way to help to boost the U.S.'s long-term economic prosperity. So I think it's very much needed. Now, Jenny Yellen also just talked about that, the United States can afford, quote unquote, 2 wars at the same time. But we really need to unpack this. I think, yes, financially, we can afford, despite that the debt is $33 trillion, but the U.S. government will never voluntarily need to default on those debts. They can always pay. They're the currency issuer of the U.S. dollars. But the question is, do we want to do that? Should we do that? What kind of spending projects we should prioritize? And do we have the resources for that? Do we really want to afford in the sense of costing human lives? But I definitely think, for some of the priorities that most of the Americans really want, right? Healthcare, better infrastructure, better healthcare, and so on and so forth. I definitely think that the United States can afford it. Now, for China, I think it's the same thing. Most of the debt right now are incurred at the local government's level. So it's kind of semi-public debt. If the central government wants, they can always centralize and physicalize, these debt. So I don't think this is really a problem. The question, of course, for those countries is the political will. Are they willing to do the right thing to solve sort of this debt problem?
Well, that is something we will definitely be keeping an eye on here, how we end up solving that problem. Thank you, Professor Liang, for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Well, that wraps it up for us. Thank you, Jessica. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any content. And for those of you who like to listen while on the go, Rising is now available anywhere you listen to podcasts. Jessica, thank you so much for another great episode.
Another good Friday. Bye, y'all.